Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 730. Today we're going to talk about Civilization New Dawn from Fantasy Flight Games. This base game came out a couple of years ago, but if you notice from the title of the video, I'm going to be reviewing this alongside the Terra Incognita expansion, the first expansion for this game. So a little bit of a spoiler, I didn't really like it when I first played the base game a couple years ago, but now I do. So we'll talk about more of that in the review part. But we'll jump down to this. This is based on the Sid Meier's Civilization game, probably more based on Civilization 6, the video game, than any of the other Civ games. And it plays, technically I think it plays 1 to 5 players. I'll talk more about that in the review part. But it's a Civilization game. You can get a number of civilizations. I think there's about 20 different ones with the expansion. And there's some different kind of variable powers between each of the different civilizations. And you're trying to complete objectives to win the game. So let's go down to the table. I'll give you kind of a rough overview of it. And then I will come back here and give you my thoughts. And I'm going to kind of present the overview as if it was the base game and that expansion were all combined. And I'll talk a little bit about the differences in the review portion and why I like the game more now, with the expansion. So here you can actually see the main map as it might look at the end of a 2-player game. So this is sort of set up for 2 players. And you've got each of the different player areas here. The orange player here who was playing China. And then here we have the purple player, which is a new player color in the expansion, which brings up the player count from 4 to 5 with the expansion. And that's playing Egypt. And there's an assortment of cards and everything like that. And we've got some other tokens over here off to the side. And then this map, which has been, I think, fully explored at this point. So this is about kind of the table space you can expect in a 2-player game. And the map will be a little bit bigger with 3, 4, and a 5-player game especially. And of course you're going to need space for all the cards and things like that. Now, new with the expansion, you don't have a pre-set up map. If you played just the base game, the map is kind of pre-set up. But with the expansion here, you're going to take these little starter tiles and put your little capital city on here, which is a city not unlike this little plastic piece there. So you take this and then you will attach that to kind of a central map that'll just be a couple of tiles, and it depends on the player count there. And these are double-sided, so there's a little bit of setup involved with that if you want to start with A or B side on the main map. But then as you explore, you'll be pulling tiles actually out of the bottom of this stack, and you can place on either side. So when you explore and you get a new tile, you can actually choose. And it has to fit in a certain way, so it basically has to touch 4 existing spaces on there. And then there's also here these forts that you'll see at the setup. So each player kind of starts with a fort that they'll place at setup. Now they don't actually own these yet, but you'll kind of seed the board with these and kind of place that out. And so there'll be a little bit of strategy at the beginning, placing your forts and then your starting tile and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the objectives new in the expansion is you're going to want to probably control at least 1 fort, kind of depending on the variant that you might play. And more often than not, probably 2 forts that are sorted on the map there. So how do you actually win the game? Let's talk about that first. Now here you can see 5 objective cards. You've got the 2 sort of gold ones there, and then the 3 silver ones at the bottom. And there's different player color tokens on the card. So the objective is to get 4 of your tokens out onto a card. And you can see the top 2 there. These are for controlling forts. And so once you control 1 fort in the game, you'll put your marker on there. Maybe the other player gets that and controls that. And then once you control a second fort, then you'll put your marker on there. So that'll be 2 out of the 4 total objectives that you need to win the game, just for controlling the forts. Now these other silver ones here, these are from a deck of objective cards, and the expansion has added some new ones, and you'll deal out 3 of these. Now there is a variant there. You could basically play without the fort objectives and deal maybe some extra ones, and there's like an epic variant that you can play to control more of these. So there's a few different ways you can do it, but this is kind of the standard setup. And then once you control one of the 2 objectives on this card, for example, this one is 4 mature cities on different tiles, on different sort of tiles there, and this is 3 different wonders. So once you control one of those, you'll put your objective marker on there. And then if you get the other objective, so let's say you had the 4 mature cities and then you got the second part, you don't put a second objective on there. So it kind of gives you a variety of different things there. And these are going to be a whole bunch of different things. It's going to kind of dictate how the game sort of flows. So one might be, more wonders focused, and one might be getting diplomacy cards, want you to get like wonders from different eras or all the same color wonders and things like that. So that's going to kind of dictate some of the strategy that players are going to approach the game with. So that's how you win the game, is taking a look at these objective cards and then, you know, going after them and then seeing how that kind of drives the interaction with the other players too. Now, playing the game itself, round over round, is very, very simple. And you can see each player is going to have this sort of row of cards here, and the expansion adds this extra little slot. So there's 2 sort of level 1 techs here. We can take a look at that. So you've got level 1, and these are sort of like plains, and you can see we get to hills, level 2, forest, desert, and then mountains. They're up to level 5. So what you do is you will do on your turn, you'll activate one of these cards. So if I wanted to activate this pottery card, I'll activate that, and it'll basically have kind of like a strength 3, or you can look at the terrain as well to kind of provide strength, what they'll talk about. You'll activate this and then shift everything else up, and then you will move this down to the bottom. So now the pottery action in this case is a little bit weaker. And so you have to, if you want to do it again, you'll have to kind of probably wait for it to build up strength again before it's useful. Now you can also see there are these trade tokens on here. You can have at most 3 on each card, and these will give you kind of a little bonus action as well. So for example, let's just take a look at this pottery card, and this is one that you'll be doing a lot of. And you can see this is a level 1 industry card, and then it has effects there, and then it shows you the trade token bonus there. So if we look here, each player is going to have a stack of their technology cards kind of in their color, and then always you're going to have a specific one that is associated with your particular civilization here. So here's China, and they have a special ability which you get throughout the course of the game, and they tell you the setup order here of how to set those cards up. Now you will always in the expansion set up the growth card on the left, and then everything else according to this one for every civilization. And then in this case, China has a different level 1 science card of writing. And some of the civilizations have different level 1 cards, or they'll have different level 2 or even level 3 cards. So you have kind of 2 special abilities, your main ability and then your sort of individualized tech card there. And over the course of the game, you can upgrade these. So we can see, look at our previous example here. This is the pottery card. This is a level 1 industry card there. And if we look here, if we wanted to upgrade that, we've got level 2 industry, animal husbandry, nationalism, and then finally urbanization. So all of these different categories you can see with these icons can be upgraded by taking basically the science action card. In this case, the writing is how you upgrade these cards, whereas the rest of these will do things, you know, usually on the board there. So for example here, this pottery card allows us to build 1 world wonder. Your production is equal to the slot's number, so you're going to generate production equal to the number where it's at. So in this case, I believe it was at a level 3, so we'd have 3 production. Or you can build 1 city on a legal space of this slot's terrain or lower within 2 spaces of a friendly space. So as you start to grow and put your city markers out, you can do that within 2 spaces, and then the number of spaces will actually go up as you increase your check. But the terrain type here is sort of also scaled in difficulty. So this one was started at a forest. So if we activated this, we couldn't build our city on a desert or a mountain space that was within 2 spaces. And then of course the bonus down here is +1 production for wonders. So if we activated this at a level 3, and let's say we had, what do we have? We had 3 of these tokens, we could spend those. So we have 3, 4, 5, 6. So we now would have 6 production for a wonder if we activate it for that. And then in the case of wonders, you can actually spend these extra luxury resources. So maybe we could get that up to like 8, 9, or 10. But that's just one example of kind of how one of these cards works. You have these cards here, which you can move your little military figures out. Now this is new with the expansion. Before you didn't actually have these little military tokens. You just attacked from kind of like your borders. And then also we have these little trade caravans, which are pretty cool. You'll send your caravans out to other player cities or even sort of neutral city states. And when you send your military tokens or your caravans out, you're always going to be able to send them from your capital city or a mature city. And a mature city is any city that is surrounded completely by your control tokens or a water space. So this is a mature city. So we could send our military or our trade caravans out, and when you send them out, you're either going to be sending them to other players' cities there, or even other city-states which might come out on the map. And when you do that, that's a way that you're going to get trade tokens. If you go to a city-state, sort of an NPC character, you're going to get trade tokens on that type. So you can see they got the little military icon there, and you got to put them on your military card. And then over here, you can see there are little diplomacy cards. Each city-state comes with 2 diplomacy cards. That will give you a special ability. And so the first 2 players to kind of interact with those city-states will get that. Although players can go and conquer these city-states and make them their own as well. And if you go to a player's city with your caravan, then you can get 2 trade tokens and put them wherever you want on your row. So it gives you some options here. And then also each player has their own stack of cards. So when I go, somebody comes to my city here, then I can say, okay, give me your joint war card or your defensive pact or open borders and stuff. And so these are another kind of like little ability in the game. So that's what will happen when you send your caravans out. You get the trade tokens, which allows you to boost this stuff up. And you can start moving these caravans out farther, move them across water, and that kind of thing as you level up the tech. And speaking of tech, like I talked about, these science cards will allow you to turn your tech dial up. And so you can see here's the tech dial for the orange player. So we'll start here at 0, and then you'll be able to move it up equal to the number it's at. So in this case, it's 4. So if we start at the beginning here, we go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you basically move it up to that slot. So every time you pass one of these banners here, you can grab a level tech equal to that card and then replace anything you want here. And you will notice that you're going to get a level 2, then another 2, and then a 3, and then a 3, then a 4, and then a 4. And you don't have to go in order. So I could jump from a level 1 all the way to a level 4 if I had never upgraded that earlier. There's nothing wrong with that, so I can wait till I get this tech dial up and just skip right to level 4 with that. Now the other actions here, these are the culture and growth actions on the board here. And what these are going to be involved with are these control tokens you put out on the board. So you'll want to start to surround your cities here to make them mature. There might be some, objectives like we saw earlier about mature objectives. And it's kind of spread your influence, because as you start to move more and more cities out, you're going to be able to draw further and further away as you get control tokens around your cities, and you can kind of make that leap further when you place your cities out. And then these are also going to add combat bonuses and things like that. So you can see, like for example, this one here will come out unreinforced, and then you can go ahead and reinforce all of these control tokens, and these are going to add combat modifiers to any combats in that hex or surrounding hexes. Now you also have these little hexagon things here, and these are districts. And so districts are going to activate periodically over the course of a round or several rounds, and those are going to generate resource tokens for you and trigger little special abilities. And that's going to be dictated by this dial here. So this first player is going to have this dial, and as everybody takes their turn, this is going to move 1 space. So in this case, this is going to move barbarians on the board. They're going to move a little bit randomly and try to run into your armies and your cities and try to delete that stuff, but of course you can go out and fight them. Whenever it hits one of these spots, you can see there's 2 of them on a loop around the board. This is going to allow you to activate your districts. And on the back of some of these cards here in the expansion, there's a bunch of these, so everybody can have an extra one. It shows you what happens when each of the different district types activates, and some of these you're going to be wanting to place them in certain types of terrain. Some of them will want you to have mature cities and things like that. So these will help you generate, again, these extra trade tokens here, which will beef up your special actions. And then as this moves along, you're going to possibly trigger a government change, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also triggering the wonder row, which I'll explain in a second, and then possibly spawning new barbarians that have been killed and not covered up their spawn points with a city or trade or a control token. Now the government change is a neat change that they've added to the expansion. So you can see these first 2 slots here with these little government icons. And you can see I've already got here autocracy placed on that. And so there's a government icon or token here for each of these different sort of types of technology. So whenever we hit this thing here, then all players can take a change in government and grab the corresponding token that matches one of the cards in their first 2 slots here. Now if you already have a government, then if you put a new one out, then the other one's going to come off. And what this does is effectively beefs up the power of one of your sort of tech types. So now whenever I activate this military card, it's going to act as if it was actually 2 slots further up on the row. Whereas if I swapped out for this communism card, then I would activate the industry as if it was one slot higher. So you can do that government change, once kind of per trip around this style here. Now here is the different wonder row there. You can see there's 4 different colors of wonders, and these are matched different kind of types. These are sort of matched to some of the different technology types, like these red ones are military wonders and so on. Now every time you go around here and we take a look here at this wonder icon, if there's not a trade token associated with that, you'll put one out, and that basically makes the cost of the wonder 1 cheaper. So for example, this one here, if we look at this one, it costs you 10 production. So remember, you generate the production from the tech card wherever it's at in the row, spend your extra trade tokens. Any of the luxury resources depicted here can be spent for counting as 2 production. So like this little oil barrel here, like that counts as 2, and I can spend as many of those as I had if I wanted to, and that'll beef up your production. And so if this card is still out here, once we make 1 trip around the dial here, first time we see one of these wonder icons, they'll become 1 cheaper. If we hit the next wonder icon there, then anything that has a trade token that hasn't been bought, then those will actually get removed and we'll deal a new one. And there's kind of like 3 eras. There's ancient, medieval, and modern. And so obviously they're going to get a little bit more expensive and a little bit more better as you kind of start to go through the deck. And it kind of acts as a little bit of a timer. Now each of those wonder cards has a little matching token, and you have to have a city to put that under. And then of course you'll get those cards, and those will give you special effects. But again, some of the objectives might want you to get, certain colors of wonders or different colors, or ones from certain eras and so on. So that might be an objective condition. Now before we talk about combat, I just wanted to kind of mention these luxury resources. You'll get these by putting out cities or control tokens on those spaces that have those, as well as these spots here. This is sort of a natural wonder, and once you control this gives you sort of a special luxury token that you can spend every turn, once per turn. So it's kind of like a sort of a permanent thing that you can get access to. And sometimes there'll be objectives for controlling a certain number of these natural wonders as well. Now let's talk about combat real quick. If we go down here, if you activate your military card, you can move out your little military tokens here, and you can upgrade this card and get access to more of these little units here. And you'll move them out, and they can only move through the terrain that's depicted here. So this would be a terrible spot to move it, because they're going to start with a combat strength of 1 and can only move through planes. They won't be able to move through anything else. Whereas if you activated that card up here, you can move through any terrain you wanted. They'll have a combat value of 5 with whoever they're attacking. And as you move through the board, you're going to end up moving into maybe other control spaces from another player. You might move up here. You can see there's a barbarian up there in that spot. That's what these little orange tokens are. So if you move into kind of an enemy spot, you have to stop moving, and then you're going to have combat. And combat's very simple. You'll take the number of the slot that you activated your military card, so let's say we did 5, and then you're going to roll a die here, and the other player or the NPC player will have somebody roll a die for them, and then they usually will take the combat strength of the terrain type. So if we look here, you can see of course the mountains here always have a sort of a combat value of 5. So these barbarians are currently in the mountains, so they start with a combat value of 5. So you take your kind of initial combat value, each player will add a d6, and then you can also spend these trade tokens from your military card to either add 1 to your die roll or re-roll your dice. So they'll come in useful for that. You probably shouldn't attack unless you have some of those on your card. So if you fight the barbarian, you'll kill them, you'll get a trade token. If you fight the opposing player and one of their control tokens, they will get the combat strength of the terrain. They will get +1 if they're reinforced, and for each adjacent hex that has a reinforced control token. So you might be running into a very sort of fortified area. The cities get the terrain sort of value, but they multiply it by 2. So if it was in a mountain, it would be 5 times 2, so it would start with 10. So having cities and mountains makes them kind of hard to beat. If you go and try to take over an empty fortress, so if you look here, these are sort of effectively in a forest, so they have a combat value of a 6, plus whatever their die roll is. So if you go, the only way that you can get a city in a fortress is actually going and doing combat there, and then that's how you can place a city there. And you can never have cities next to each other, and you can never have cities next to a fortress. But of course, this is, the way that you're going to go, and the players will be kind of jockeying back and forth, taking over cities and, trading them back and forth as players attack them and so on. And there's some other little rules. So like, if you have an army in the same spot and somebody, say, was attacking that city, the army will contribute +2 to that. So if you attack this city as it was, it would start off at 8 because it'd be 6. So the fortress or the forest times 2, +2 for that. And then also there is 1, in this case, reinforced token. So there's already 9 combat in here. So if you came in with your army here and you had 5, it's already 5 to 9. And so you better have some trade tokens to spend there. And that would be a tough get there. So that's a general overview. You're going to be moving around trying to control different parts of the board, getting access to different resources, fending off barbarians, trying to carve out space to kind of grow your empire, get certain cities out. But a lot of that's going to be driven by these objective cards up here at the top. And so you might focus more on wonders. You might focus more on area control. There will be a lot of different things, but with the expansion anyway, you're going to want to at least take over some territory to control some of the fortresses and prevent others from controlling other fortresses as well. Okay, so that is Civilization New Dawn with the Terra Incognita expansion. And I'll talk a little bit through my 3 pillars of review about kind of the base game and the expansion and why I like it now with the expansion. So first thing I'll talk about is player count. Now I have played it 2, 3, 4, and 5, although I only played the base game once with 4, and actually I've only played the game with the expansion with 2, 3, and 5 players. Now I would say, just talking pure player count here, I really think you want to have probably at least 3 players. Like, it's okay with 2. Like, it's kind of fine with 2, but there's just some stuff that you miss out on with 2 players. The diplomacy cards, when you send caravans to each other's cities, they're kind of weird in a 2-player game, and I don't really know that I really like that. I mean, it's just kind of a part of the game that you sort of ignore. I mean, you can take it and you can get it, but you probably end up having to attack that player and then lose the diplomacy card anyway. There's the one card, I think it's called Embassy, which you can get sort of a free luxury resource out of. So that's basically the default one to take from that player, and nobody else is there to steal it from you. So, you always have that available to you. So other than that, and there's a couple other things, that just kind of doesn't feel quite as Civilization-like. If there's only 2 empires, kind of the idea is that there's more sort of cultures and things vying for things than just 2. So you lose a little bit of that with 2 players, but it actually plays pretty decently with 2 players, and I kind of like it there. If somebody wanted to play with 2 players, I totally would, because the game is interesting enough that it's still cool to play. Now, I have played it with 5. I thought that was really, really cool to play with 5, and it was fine. It didn't take us too long. I don't remember exactly how long. It was maybe 3 hours. I'm not sure exactly, but I think it would go quicker. But it was, it was a nice 5-player kind of epic feeling Civilization game. And, we did, I think at that time we had 2 new players to the game. So maybe it took a little bit longer there, but the turns are pretty quick. You just sort of grab the card and activate it. And once you get an idea of what each of the 5 different tech types do, even as you upgrade them, they're doing the same thing. They're just kind of a more high-powered version of that. So once you kind of understand, okay, this one builds wonders, this one builds, in cities, and this one moves my army. Okay, good. I got all those basically 6 actions that I can do with the expansion. And so I think my favorite player count would be 5, just because it's a Civilization game and I like to have all that kind of dynamic involved. But I would happily play this with 3, 4, or 5. I think just having 3 players is enough to, sort of break up some of the stuff. And the diplomacy cards kind of come in and they sort of act as sort of a negotiation, sort of tacit or type of thing, and, that kind of thing. So it's enough there. Now it's pretty sort of, not Eurofied, but it's kind of abstracted a little bit from some of the other Civilization games. But 3 players is good. Anything 3+ is good, and I think it works great at 2. I haven't had a chance to play the solo thing. There's a free solo mode you can download. I looked at it. It didn't seem that interesting to me. And just sort of a side note, it was kind of spoil how much I enjoy this game. When I sat down to sort of set this up the other day to record today, I was like, oh, cool, 2-player game. And I was like, let me just solo this. I just soloed the whole game. And I was like, that was fun. I was like, I don't need a solo variant. I could just do that if I wanted to. It was fine, because there's no hidden information or anything, right? So it's just like, okay, Okay, purple player is going to focus on this and I'll play that way, and the orange player will focus on that. So it works fine if you just want to set it up in solo like a 2-player game and not worry about like having to beat something. It works okay that way. So yeah, but anything 3+ is good. As far as the time it takes, what's the box say here? Because the 3-player game, I think we played it was like 2 hours. It says 1 to 2 hours, yep. So maybe with the expansion of the 5th player, that's supposed to go up. But yeah, you're looking at like a 2 to 3 hour game, which is good for like a Civilization game, because a lot of those are like several hours long, more traditional thing. And for a long time, that was kind of like the holy grail, so to speak, of a Civilization game. It's like, hey, can we get like a really epic feeling Civilization game down to about 2 hours or so? And sort of this will lead me into my next point here, my next pillar, is I think this one, along with a game called Golden Ages, really kind of hit that mark. And Golden Ages is more of a Euro feel sort of Civilization game. And I've reviewed that game and its expansion as well. And to me, this one is probably just slightly surpassed that. So if I had to kind of do a quick thing, because if I'm going to compare this to other Civilization games, my best favorite is Clash of Cultures, especially the new Monumental Edition, which I reviewed not long ago. And a lot of comments from that review, and kind of over time, were people telling me, hey, you really need to try Civilization New Dawn. I'm like, well, I don't like it. But then I got some comments recently about like, you got to try it with the expansion. And I was like, okay, let me look it up and see how this game works. And I was like, okay, so this looks like it does fix some of the things that bugged me about the base game. And so then I've had a chance to try it now a few times. And so I think this is probably my second favorite Civilization game, actually, of all time. And it probably ekes out, I think, it's kind of a toss-up between Golden Ages and this. Golden Ages is a lot of different things. It's got some very unique mechanics and stuff, whereas this is pretty unique. I mean, it's got that same kind of, sort of like a dudes on the map area control majority thing, but the objective cards really set this apart, and it really changes up the dynamics of one game to the next. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes out of that simple system of, okay, here's my objectives, here's my 6 techs, my 6 sort of basic actions that I can take. And there's a real fun kind of, it's almost like a racing game in a way, but it doesn't really feel like you're racing, because it's basically the first person to get the 4 objectives, you'll finish the round out, but then they're going to win. And there's some, I think the tiebreaker with the expansion is most wonders. So, if, 2 people get the 4 objectives, which I've seen a lot of games where like you're either like, you're 1 turn away and that person just gets it, or maybe there's 2 people tied and then there's a tiebreaker. It seems like that really kind of comes down to the wire. I mean, not everybody's tied, but enough people. So I think the game's good that way, where, okay, if 2 people are tied, that's okay. But if like all 5 people were tied, then it would be like, well, is this really how it should be? So that basic simple system of those objectives and those cards just really kind of rolls you through the turns there. And you get some really cool, like, emergent style gameplay of the board kind of being explored and sort of dynamically laid out. Like, some people might have a lot of city-states on their side of the board, so they're going to get easy access to some of those trade routes, where somebody else, they might have to deal more with some of the natural wonders and some of the barbarians and stuff. So they have to kind of go about getting their trade tokens a different way. So that's interesting. And sometimes the map may or may not have like a lot of water. So if you have like a lot of water, which came up in one of the 3-player games, where this is like a huge ocean in the middle of the map, and it was like, okay, well, now we got to upgrade our economy cards, because then you can get to like the steam engine, and you can start moving through water, because normally you can't. So those kind of like emergent sort of dynamics sort of come out, really get generated in a fun way with this game. And having the different civilization powers and the different civilization techs is really neat. That gives you kind of a different approach to it, and it kind of informs which objectives you kind of want to go after and stuff like that. So all of these kind of interlocking pieces are so very simple, like nothing's really that complex here, but they interlock in different ways, and there's just a lot of variability. And at the end of the day, it feels very Civilization-esque, where you're taking over territory, establishing trade routes and relationships with these different city-states and even the other players. You're going to have some little combats and wars and that kind of thing. There's an economy aspect, and all of that stuff has been very, very streamlined down, but still the thematics and everything is very, very present in the game. So I definitely recommend this. Now, the things that I liked about this, some of the stuff that I talked about this, is like in the expansion there was no exploring. You just had a fixed map, which is okay, but then it's like a fixed, it's too abstract-y, sort of like, okay, objectives, fixed map, da-da-da-da, here's that. Whereas this, you have the exploration side of it. So there's a little bit of dynamics there that can change up how things work, and basically sort of how the map and those weird funky shaped tiles sort of situate. You can make for some real interesting encounters kind of early in the game where those come out and you're like, oh, you got something there, so maybe I can just jab over there. Whereas when it's kind of laid out for you, it's not as fun because you're not exploring. It's like, there's a cool feeling about like, ooh, what are we going to find over the horizon? You miss out on that. So having that is cool, and that can lead to some real interesting dynamics on the board that you're just like, oh crap, there's like 2 city states here now, and there's like all this stuff, and now we're gonna go head to head really quickly. So that's cool that dynamic happens. And before with the military combat, you were just sort of like, I felt like it was very sort of plotting, how you'd get some cities out, you get some tokens out, and you sort of attack from your borders, and that was it. You didn't have any military units that were moving around, so there was no sort of tactics and dynamics that made you feel like you had some generals sort of in the civilization, because you had some interesting stuff here where you start to get a couple more of your army tokens out, and you're like, okay, well, if I go here in the order that I attack, and so if I attack this thing first, maybe I'll go after the barbarian here, get a trade token from killing it, because maybe I've got a little bonus to fight barbarians, and then I'll send my other army over here to fight that fort or try to attack you, because I can generate that trade token from the first combat and get it, So there's some interesting tactics there with moving your armies around like that, and maybe you're leaving them out there after you do it to get zapped, and so you're like, oh crap, now I have to, my cities on the front lines aren't mature, so now I've got to send them out from the capital again. So there's a lot of cool things there that they've added. The whole district token thing is neat, and that's right out of the video game, the Civilization 6 video game anyway, is the districts. And so getting those out and sort of looking at the terrain around some of your cities and sort of setting up a little sort of economic engine there with those different districts to generate those trade tokens is a cool thing. And there's just a nice dynamic there with how those things work. And it does have that thing, which I enjoy, but I think it takes a couple of plays to get into here, where you have sort of like I talked about, a real simple system of just, these are the objectives, this is what I'm going to go for, I'm going to work through my card row, try to get that in a good cadence and a good case. But once you start to get those diplomacy cards from the NPCs and the other players, and then you get those wonders, start to get a couple wonders, you start to add on the special abilities, and they start to sort of snowball just like a little bit. So there can be a lot of, it's a very, very FFG feeling game, right? Where you're like, oh, I can do this, but now I can do this and this. And so little combos, and you're like, oh crap, I didn't notice that across the board, And so I didn't even know you could do that, because I didn't even know that wonder existed. So like the first play is just going to be like, oh, well, Billy got that, and that's totally not fair. Well, next time you'll know that wonder is there and how good it is, or you'll know that city state is going to give you like +2 to your combats, and like, well, I better get a caravan over there before everybody else. So again, that kind of dynamics there in that layer. So your first game, might be a little bit of like, wow, there's after we get going, there's like a lot of special abilities in play, but it's not too bad, I don't think, because everybody's just going to have a couple. And once you kind of go, oh, well, you got, what's that one? The army, what's it called? Terracotta Army. You're like, okay, everybody's, what that is. And that's what I like about the game, where you see those wonders come out, and you see those city states with those abilities come out, and everybody's like, ooh, that one's out again. So it's got a cool kind of drafting powers thing that you've got to, do some actual work to obtain. So anyway, yeah, that is Civilization New Dawn with the Terra Incognita expansion. I highly recommend it. It definitely hasn't replaced Clash of Cultures for me, but this one plays quicker. You can play it up to 5 players. I would probably, this is actually a tough call for me. I think I probably would prefer this at 2 players than Clash of Cultures. I don't know. I think the dynamics of Clash of Cultures, I really want to play that with just 4 players all the time. 3 players is fine, but that one really excels at 4-player. Like, if you had to say, Joel, your perfect Civ experience right now would be 4-player Clash Cultures all day long. Whereas this one, if I was playing this, if we had 5 players, Clash doesn't play 5 players, and I think this plays great at 5 players. I think I would prefer this at 2 players. 3 players would be kind of a toss-up. It'd just be kind of what I'm in the mood for. But this has enough sort of things to chew on that I think it really sits, to me, at the top of like that Civilization genre. of stuff. And so, yeah, and it really feels like the video game. I'm a big fan of Civilization 5, and I like 6 enough, but this has some cool things. If you've played a lot of Civilization 6, you're like, this is cool. So it also has that kind of added thing of like, oh, this is kind of like that thing works in Civilization 6. And so they actually did a good job of translating just that video game too, which I don't really care about. But but you noticed it. You definitely notice it. Anyway, so that's Civilization New Dawn, Terra Incognita. Definitely take a look. Thanks.